All right, y'all. So we got an interesting twist in the student loan reduction case that I wasn't expecting, to be honest with you. It looked to me like a total foregone conclusion that this thing is over. I mean, obviously, the Supreme Court is a very right-wing court, and they're super ideological. They're activist judges. They don't care what the law says. They're just going to slap down student loan debt reduction anyway. Now, that is still, I will say, that is still, in my estimation, likely. That is still likely to be the case that, Biden's move is going to be killed here. But, there is just a little teeny bit of hope that I want to share with you. So this is in CNBC. Biden administration lawyer may have saved student loan forgiveness plan at the Supreme Court, experts say. Experts have predicted that the Supreme Court will rule against President Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, but some changed their minds after oral arguments praising the lawyer who presented the administration's case. Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar's preparation, poise, and power were impressive, said higher education expert Mark Kantrowitz. Now, look, it's hard to determine how much of this is just like wishful thinking and projection from these experts who are in favor of the student loan debt reduction onto the situation that they're seeing in front of them. It's hard to tell. And I believe we have audio that comes out of the court, but I don't think we have video that comes out of the court. And so you get maybe a sense of what's going on, but you don't have the full picture of what's going on in there. Now, according to this article, this lawyer basically totally changed the tone of what the justices were saying and how they felt. To this point, you had the justices were very, very skeptical of Joe Biden's move here. And they seem to be, you could always tell where they're leaning by the questions that they ask and how they ask them. So if they're really grilling, one attorney and not the other, then it's like, okay, they're clearly more on that side of the issue than they are on this side of the issue. But with what this lawyer did, it totally flipped the dynamic in the room, and at least according to some people, may have changed the minds of some of the justices. The government's top Supreme Court lawyer may have saved President Joe Biden's $400 billion student loan forgiveness plan from what experts considered all but certain defeat. Experts lobbed praise on Solicitor General Elizabeth Prelogar, the lawyer who represented the Biden administration in front of the 9 justices Tuesday. Quote, the Biden administration now seems more likely than not to win the cases, said higher education expert Mark Kantrowitz. Now, again, massive grain of salt, massive asterisk. This guy could just be projecting. We don't know. Quote, her preparation, poise, and power were impressive. In contrast, the attorneys for plaintiffs opposed to the program were less than stellar, Kantrowitz said. It was like the difference between a star quarterback and 2 tiddlywink players, he said. University of Illinois Chicago law professor Stephen Schwinn agreed. Prelogar knocked it out of the park. I do think she could have influenced or even changed the thinking of 2 justices, maybe more, he added. On Wednesday, Fordham law professor Jed Sugarman tweeted that he remains struck by SG Elizabeth Prelogar's brilliant performance. She may have snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. The 9 justices considered 2 legal challenges to Biden's plan to cancel up to $20,000 in student debt for borrowers. 6 GOP-led states, Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Nebraska, and South Carolina, had brought one of the suits, and the other was backed by the Job Creators Network Foundation, a conservative advocacy organization. Now, more on this in a second, because the people who are fighting the student loan debt reduction, it is absolutely, positively, 100% without a doubt, astroturfed. You know what that means? It's fake. It is fake. No, these people, there aren't people who are actually damaged by what the administration did here. It just helps working people. But billionaires and corporations got together and said, how can we kill it? We want workers to be more desperate so we have more leverage over them so we can get them to do whatever we want. That is not an exaggeration. That is not hyperbole. That is exactly what's happening, and you're about to see proof of that. All right, they continue here. Prelogar argued that the president was acting squarely within the law to avoid borrower distress during national emergencies, and that plaintiffs had not shown in any way that they'd be harmed by the policy, which is typically a requirement to establish so-called legal standing. When the Biden administration rolled out its student loan forgiveness plan in August, it cited the HEROES Act of 2003 as its legal justification. That law, which is a product of the September 11th terrorist attacks, allows the U.S. Secretary of Education to waive or modify student loan programs to ensure borrowers aren't left worse off because of a national emergency. Opponents of the president's plan say canceling hundreds of billions of dollars in student debt for tens of millions of Americans goes far beyond the scope of the HEROES Act. But look, they just made up that position, right? They made it up. This legal justification was even used by Trump in a few different instances vis-a-vis student loan debt. He paused it for the entire country during the COVID pandemic, by the way, something that was good. I'm happy that he did that. And then he also eliminated little pockets of student loan debt for specific categories, like one I think was disabled veterans or whatever. And I vaguely remember this because we covered it. I just don't remember the exact categories that he forgave the debt for. But he was right to do that. Nobody questioned it then. They're only bringing it up now under Biden. And again, this is a very ideological Supreme Court. They're from the Federalist Society. They're activist judges from a right-wing perspective. Justice Clarence Thomas, who kicked off the justices' questioning of the Biden administration, seemed to echo that view. Quote, "We're talking about $500 billion and 43 million Americans," Thomas said. "How does that fit under the normal understanding of modifying?" Yeah, but the other word in the law is waive. You can waive the debt. So why are you bringing up modifying? You could bring up waive. And this is obviously clearly falls into the scope of waiving it. Prelogar countered, that the heart of the provision's purpose was to allow the secretary to make sure borrowers don't suffer financially because of their loans during a crisis. That's exactly what the Biden administration's policy does. Okay, so there was a poll that came out that like 90% of student loan borrowers were not in a position where they could start paying it back again. I mean, that's pretty strong evidence that this is, in the interest of those people and it's within the legal authority of the government. A top U.S. Department of Education official recently warned that the public health crisis has caused considerable financial harm to student loan borrowers and that its debt cancellation plan is necessary to stave off a historic rise in delinquencies and defaults. Well, that's obviously true. It couldn't have surprised Congress one bit that in response to a hardship posed by national emergency, the Secretary might consider similarly providing discharge if that's what it takes to make sure borrowers don't default, Prelogar said. Justice Elena Kagan agreed. Quote, "This is an emergency provision," Kagan said at one point, posing a hypothetical that the crisis had been an earthquake rather than a pandemic. Quote, "You don't think Congress wanted to give the Secretary power to say, oh my gosh, people have had their homes wiped out, we're going to discharge their student loans?" So, look, again, it's hard to tell how much of this is wishful thinking and how much of this is like projection by the experts in the crowd onto this attorney's performance. But at least now it's not like unanimous that everybody's saying, oh, this thing is getting slapped down. We'll see. I still think it is more likely it gets slapped down than doesn't. But I will say this. The law is clear. Even though this isn't the legal justification that I would use to wipe out student loan debt, I would just use the 1965 Higher Education Act. I still think he has the ability to do it. And the fact that the opposition is so astroturfed that's the only fact I need to know as to how bogus this whole charade is. So now I'm going to prove to you that this is all fake. Like, this is all fake. There aren't like two equally compelling but opposite legal theories at play here. You have billionaire and corporate hacks throwing around their influence, and then you have the side that is correct, which is the pro-student loan debt reduction side. Okay, so let me show you just who's funding the effort to strike down the student loan debt reduction.
Have you heard about the corporate-backed right-wing network trying to sabotage your student debt relief at the Supreme Court? I didn't think so. The media's been all over President Biden's plan to eliminate up to $20,000 in student debt. But there's one critical piece they've left out of this coverage. Who's funding the lawsuit against it? Pull back the curtain and you'll see what's really going on here. The Supreme Court is hearing two cases that will decide the current fate of Biden's proposed student debt relief plan. One of those cases, Department of Education versus Brown, was ostensibly brought by a woman named Myra Brown from Texas. She argues that she's harmed by this debt relief plan because her privately funded student loans are not eligible to be eliminated. Ironically, she's already a beneficiary of debt cancellation. The government forgave her $48,000 Paycheck Protection Program business loan during the pandemic. But
stop and think about that, man. Stop and think about that. That's incredible. So she's already taken loan forgiveness from the government, and it helped her, and she acknowledges that, but she says, this other loan forgiveness, how dare you? This doesn't help me. Now, by the way, Biden tried to eliminate the privately held loans too. And then there were a bunch of lawsuits on that front, and he was told, hey, this is a case that we're actually not going to win. because the federal government holds 90% of student loan debt, and they could do what they want with that, but the other 10% they don't hold. So the argument of like, hey, they can't control the loans they don't hold, yeah, there's a better legal argument for the privately held loans than there is for the publicly held loans. So, he wanted to even forgive that, but couldn't. Anyway, let's continue.
Myra Brown is just a patsy. The case was actually brought and funded by an extreme right-wing donor network, deceptively named the Job Creators Network. The group argues Biden's student loan cancellation plan should be struck down on the grounds that such relief represents government overreach and reckless government spending. Funny enough.
By the way, those are not legal arguments. Those are political arguments. And what we're always told about the court is it's not about politics, it's about legality. It's about interpreting the law as it is written. But they're very clearly not. This is a political hatchet job, is what it is. Now, by the way, Neil Gorsuch gave the game away a little bit when he was questioning in this case. He said, "Is this fair?" And it's like, whoa, hold on. That is not your job, Neil Gorsuch. It is not your job to consider, is this fair or is this not fair? That's the job of your elected officials. That's the job of politicians. They can weigh whether or not this is fair or unfair, and they can weigh the will of the people and all that stuff, and they should, right? But if you are a Supreme Court justice, if you're a judge of any kind, it is this legal? If we go by the letter of the law or the spirit of the law, is this allowable? That's your job. So for him to bring up fairness is crazy. And by the way, of course, from his perspective, no, this is not fair. But 90% of the relief goes to people who make $75,000 a year or less, and they're saddled with debt. They can't afford the debt. And it just gives them a chance. Of course that's fair. Of course that's just. We shouldn't even have student loan debt. I mean, that's a crazy thing to exist. In the same way we shouldn't have medical debt. Other developed countries don't have medical debt. Look at how we fund high schools in this country, public high schools. That's paid for. It's free at the point of service, paid for by tax dollars. You don't have to go into debt to go to high school. And we're just saying, hey, that it should be the case for college too. And they're trying to give people a little bit of a break, not even a big break. I would eliminate all the student loan debt. But Biden's just trying to give them a little bit of a break, and they're trying to block it.
That network is comprised of the same Trump-loving billionaires and corporations that were happy to be showered with the GOP's $1.9 trillion tax cut for the rich and countless corporate subsidies.
So stop and think about that. How Orwellian is this? The Job Creators Network. They try to pretend like, bro, we're repping small businesses and stuff over here. We're just looking out for the little guy. It's just a front. It's an astroturfed organization funded by billionaires and corporations. And they're like, we're against the big government spending, while they are the beneficiaries of big government spending all the time. Through corporate subsidies, which is just corporate welfare, and through tax cuts for the wealthy. Guys, it's all a lie. It's all fake. This is an oligarchy. This is how an oligarchy functions.
Job Creators Network even had their own debt canceled. Their $135,000 Paycheck Protection Program loan in 2020 was forgiven.
Yeah, why don't you guys sue to stop that? This is government overreach. This is big government spending. Sue to stop your own debt cancellation. Oh, that's right. You would never do that because it helps you. But if something helps regular working people who don't have lobbyists fighting on their behalf, you want to crush them under your boot and give your corporations leverage over them to force them to work for you for low wages. That's exactly what's going on here.
The Job Creators Network passes itself off as just a bunch of entrepreneurs who care about small businesses. But let's take a look at who funds the group that is hell-bent on keeping you loaded with student debt, shall we? Let's start with Bernie Marcus, who organized the Job Creators Network in 2010 and just so happens to also be the co-founder and former CEO of everyone's favorite small business, Home Depot. Marcus is worth a whopping $8.8 billion and has showered the Job Creators Network with $3.9 million over the past decade. Marcus has no shame in using his billions to try to buy elections for conservative and far-right politicians who serve corporate power. He spent $64 million backing the likes of Mitch McConnell, Ron DeSantis, and Donald Trump, among others. And Home Depot happily accepted over $94 million of government subsidies. Apparently he's pro-government spending when it comes to corporate subsidies, but canceling student debt for millions of borrowers across the country, that's a bridge too far. He recently said that no one wants to work because they're all too lazy, too fat, and too stupid.
Billionaire and
I want to give massive credit here to More Perfect Union for doing this segment and really educating people. But I mean, look, this is something you have to point this out. Why isn't it CNN, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, even throw Fox News in there? Why would they not give all of this information to expose how this case is basically fake? Again, they're pretending this is like legal scholars on both sides were having a highfalutin argument about whether or not the move from Biden is objectively legal or not. And it's like, that is not what's going on at all here. This is a political hatchet job brought about by the oligarchs who don't even want to give a crumb of help to the peasants.
Home Depot co-founder Bernie Marcus is blasting socialism, rightly so, for making things worse because socialism sucks.
But he's not the only extreme right-wing donor behind the effort. Meet everyone's favorite hedge fund family of white nationalists, the Mercers. Perhaps you've heard of the Mercer family. The Mercers are mega donors who were probably more responsible than anyone for making Steve Bannon a household name and getting Donald Trump elected in 2016. They're also part owners of Breitbart News, which it seems never met a white nationalist it didn't like. Rebecca Mercer runs a pro-Trump group called Making America Great. They splurged on trying to elect right-wingers and have given over $1 million to the Job Creators Network. Who else is part of this hodgepodge of government-hating billionaires who love government handouts? None other than the Koch brothers, the OG billionaire backers of the right. The Job Creators Network partners include the likes of FreedomWorks and the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, groups that the Koch donor network and its dark money empire has used in their ongoing corporate takeover of the US government. And that's not all. Those Ben Shapiro wannabes on campus with Turning Point USA,
there's no such thing as white privilege or racism, so.
Also a partner of the network. But it's not just individual far-right billionaires that are bankrolling the Job Creators Network. It's also big corporations themselves. The Retail Industry Leaders Association has given $4.6 million since 2012, and the National Restaurant Association threw in another $100,000. RELA and the NRA, yes, there's another NRA, are industry groups funded by corporations like Walmart, Home Depot, Dollar General, Starbucks, Olive Garden, Applebee's, and Disney. They've splurged millions upon millions of dollars lobbying to crush efforts to raise the minimum wage and expand union rights. They say they're against government spending, but what they're really against is government spending for working people.
That is 1 trillion% correct. That is 1 trillion% correct. This is a great video.
Take it from Melissa Byrne, who has been on the front lines fighting for student debt relief for years.
98% of the people who applied for debt relief come from zip codes making under $75,000 a year. 2/3 of the people come from zip codes making under $40,000 a year. So these are people who are struggling. These are people who, if the loans turn back on, won't be able to make payments. Will have to, maybe won't be able to make rent, won't be able to do other things, put groceries, pay for health insurance. And so this debt relief really helps make families whole.
The billionaire funders of the Job Creators Network also have friends on the very same Supreme Court that will be ruling on the group's lawsuit. Talk about overreach. One big donor to the Job Creators Network, Philip Anschutz, is a Colorado billionaire who backed the rise of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch. Then there's the Federalist Society, which has overseen the corporate takeover of our federal courts, including the Supreme Court. The Koch brothers and the small business entrepreneur Bernie Marcus are among the Federalist Society's top donors. Supreme Court justices like Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Brett Kavanaugh are openly chummy with the Federalist Society and have earned major applause from speeches at its events. And now they'll be deciding on the Job Creators Network student loan lawsuit, brought to them by the same big donors that give to their pals at the Federalist Society.
Totally corrupt. That's totally corrupt. They should recuse themselves, but they're not going to do that. They're not going to do it. But I mean, this is the kind of gross, big money, incestuous stuff that goes on. The Supreme Court is just as corrupt as any, big politician in the country.
And finally, just stay in the matrix with me for one more second. A slew of billionaires, industry groups, and think tanks that are all part of the same corporate ecosystem that supports the mission of the Job Creators Network, from the Cato Institute and the Manhattan Institute to Betsy DeVos and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, are also stepping in to back the group's lawsuit aiming to crush student debt relief. They're submitting statements of support for the lawsuit to the Supreme Court, and the Cato Institute even has its own lawsuit against student debt relief. So let's do a little recap. The same billionaires and corporations that don't want you to have higher wages, that want to bust your unions, that don't want you to have decent and free medical care, that want to dictate what you do with your body, that want more tax cuts for the super rich, they're the ones that also want you to stay neck deep in student debt so that they can continue to profit and so that your life remains so precarious that you don't have a choice but to just shut up and accept the crumbs that they give you. That's who's backing this lawsuit.
There you go, guys. There you go. I couldn't have said it any better myself. This is astroturfed. This is totally fake. This isn't a real legal battle. It's a political one. It's a political one. And again, you're not going to hear that many other places. Shout out to More Perfect Union for doing a phenomenal segment on this. And let's just hope that this article here from CNBC is not cope. Let's hope it's real, and let's hope there's actually a prayer for student loan debt forgiveness.